Growing up, my brother Leo and I were like Tom and Jerry. We had beef on sight. If I saw him walking into the kitchen, I'd run at him with a knife. If he saw me brushing my teeth, he'd grab Dad's golf club and hit my head. We fought over everything. The TV remote, the first slice of pizza. We even fought over who hated each other more. Full-on fistfights that ended with Mom screaming and regular ambulance rides. We couldn't stand each other until we hit our late teens and decided to do MMA together. We had no idea it would one day destroy our family. The first time we sparred, he knocked me out. I threw him a pair of gloves that night and told him to put them on. We both went to school with black eyes the next day. Soon, we were pushing each other to get better, going to MMA gym together, and somewhere along the way became best friends. Wherever he went, I went. If you messed with me, you messed with him. 12 years later, we had our black belts. We were training at the gym one day when we heard buzzing coming from Leo's bag. He walked over, checked his phone, and saw 2 missed calls from Mom. His eyes burst open. Mom's golden rule was, she never called twice unless someone died or was about to. He called back immediately. His expression changed from confused to terrified in seconds. We need to go now. He ground his stuff and ran for the door. I followed without asking. We rushed to the hospital. The whole drive, Leo wouldn't tell me what Mom said, just kept saying, hurry up. When we got to her room, I wasn't ready for what I saw. Mom was in the hospital bed with a broken nose and her face purple and swollen. She looked like she'd been in a car crash. What happened? Leo asked, his voice shaking. Mom started crying. Someone broke into the house. 2 men. They beat me up. Leo's face turned to rage in seconds while I took Mom's hand. The men didn't take anything, Mom continued. Not my purse, not the TV, nothing. It's like they broke in to hurt me. My mind started racing. Who would do that? And why? Mom read our minds at that moment. Maybe you can see who it was from the security video. She pointed to the phone in her jacket pocket. You see, Mom had CCTV cameras installed in her house because she was terrified of break-ins. Leo and I grabbed her phone and watched the security video together. 2 men with masks picked her lock, walked in, and went straight for her. Didn't even look at valuables. They tackled her and hit her repeatedly. It was gruesome to watch, and we almost cried. Their entire bodies were covered in black clothing. But when one of them reached up, his neck was visible for just a second. There was a tattoo there, a really distinct one. I stared at it closer. Wait, I know that tattoo. What? Leo looked at me. That's Dad's friend Silas. He has that exact tattoo on his neck. Leo's eyes bugged out like they do before his matches. You see, 5 years ago, Dad's coworker accused our mom of cheating because she wanted Dad for herself. She showed him screenshots proving Mom was unfaithful. He believed it without talking to her. I remember he was so angry when he left, so hateful. Do you think Dad did this? I asked quietly. Do you think he had Silas attack Mom? Should we tell the cops? We sat in silence for a long time. Then Leo said something that changed everything. We're not going to the cops. What? Leo snarled. They'll get a trial in 6 months. Probation, maybe. That's not real justice. We'll handle this ourselves. I looked at Mom's swollen face and nodded. What do? We find out who did it, then we make it right. For the next 13 months, we became investigators. We asked around about Silas. We followed him, watched where he went, who he talked to. The whole time we trained harder than we ever had. Every punch we threw was for Mom. Every hour spent tracking brought us closer to the truth. The more we dug, the more everything pointed to Silas. He was Dad's best friend. His coworker saw a black outfit in his bag the day Mom was attacked. He suddenly had a new car and his mortgage paid off. Dad used to have this thing where he paid people for favors in the past. When we decided it was him, we knew what to do. We picked a Friday night when Silas left his usual strip club. We waited in the parking lot. When he walked out, we stepped in front. I didn't say anything, just stared with my baseball bat in hand. Leo cracked his knuckles. Silas looked at us, at our hands, then back at our faces. Get in the car. Silas bowed in. We drove to Dad's house. We'd been watching him too. We knew he was home alone. When we knocked, he opened the door, and his reaction was priceless. We pushed past him into the house. Silas tried to back away, but we blocked him. "Tell us what you did to Mom," I said. "I don't know what you're talking about," Silas stammered. Leo punched Silas with the strength of 13 years of training and rage. He fell to the floor. "We have video. We saw your tattoo." Dad stepped between us. "Stop, please stop." "Did you tell him to do it?" I asked Dad. "Did you have Silas beat up Mom?" "No." Dad looked panicked. "I didn't do anything." Leo got in Dad's face. "Then who was the other person with you? Who else attacked our mom?" Dad's face crumbled as he cowered. "It wasn't me. I swear it wasn't me." "Then who?" Leo was yelling now. Dad sank into the wall. His voice came out broken. "It was my son, my other son before I met your mother. You don't know about him. He's 32. The room went silent. Dad had another son, a son who beat our mom half to death. Leo and I looked at each other and gave that subtle nod that meant it was time to handle business. I grabbed Dad by the collar and yanked him forward until our faces were inches apart. His breath smelled like fear and cheap whiskey. Leo moved fast, positioning himself between us and the front door so Silas couldn't make a run for it. Dad's hands shook as words tumbled out of his mouth, saying his other son's name was Marcus, that he'd been supporting him for years without telling anyone. He claimed Marcus needed money, and Dad told him about valuables in Mom's house. The lie was so bad, it made my blood feel like it was boiling. I shoved Dad backward hard, and he stumbled against the wall. Nothing was taken from Mom's house. Not her purse, not the TV, nothing. It's like they broke in to hurt her. My mind started racing. Who would do that? And why? Mom read our minds at that moment. "Maybe you can see who it was from the security video." She pointed to the phone in her jacket pocket.
"If either of them calls Marcus or the cops before we're done, we'll come back and finish what we started tonight." The drive to Marcus's place took 20 minutes, and neither Leo nor I said a single word. My hands squeezed the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white, and I could feel the leather creaking under my grip. Leo's breathing got heavier and heavier, like it always does right before a match. We were about to cross a line we could never come back from, but I kept seeing Mom's broken nose and swollen face in my mind. The address Dad gave us led to a run-down apartment building with half the security lights broken and graffiti covering the walls. We parked across the street and watched the third-floor window Dad said was Marcus's. Around midnight, we saw movement inside, a shadow passing by the window. Leo suggested we wait until morning, when Marcus left for work somewhere public, where we could grab him without neighbors hearing and calling the police. Every part of me wanted to go up there right now and kick down his door. But Leo's right. We spent 13 months being smart about this, tracking Silas and gathering evidence. Rushing in angry now is how we get caught, or hurt, or worse. We drove to an all-night diner and slid into a corner booth. The waitress brought us coffee, and we sat there writing down everything Dad told us about Marcus on napkins. His name, his age, his address, the fact that Dad paid him to do this. At 3 a.m, my phone started buzzing, and Mom's name lit up the screen. My stomach dropped because she never calls this late. I answered and heard her crying, asking where we were, saying she woke up from a nightmare about us getting hurt. I lied and told her we were at Leo's apartment watching movies and eating pizza. She didn't sound like she believed me, but she told us to be careful and hung up. We went back to Marcus's building at 6 a.m. and parked in the same spot. At 6:30, Marcus came out wearing a brown delivery truck uniform with a company logo on the chest. Leo took photos of his license plate and the truck logo with his phone. We followed him to a big warehouse on the edge of town and watched him clock in through the front entrance. Now we knew his schedule and where he worked. Over the next week, we tracked Marcus exactly like we tracked Silas. He worked 10-hour shifts, 5 days a week, stopped at the same convenience store every night to buy beer, and went straight home. His apartment was always dark by 10 o'clock. He lived alone with no girlfriend or roommate that we could see. Leo found Marcus's social media accounts, and we spent hours going through his photos. There were pictures of him with Dad from years ago at barbecues and baseball games, family gatherings we were never invited to. Birthday parties where Dad is smiling and hugging Marcus like he's proud of him. A whole secret life Dad kept hidden from us and Mom. The photos made me feel sick because Dad chose this son over us. He paid him to hurt Mom and never once mentioned having another kid in all the years we were growing up. Leo found posts from Marcus complaining about money problems and child support payments he couldn't afford. This gave us more pieces of why Dad picked him. Dad probably promised Marcus enough cash to solve all his financial troubles in exchange for scaring Mom. I scrolled through more of Marcus's social media and found photos from 3 years ago showing him at a kid's birthday party with a little girl. The caption said, "Best day with my princess," and there were dozens of comments about how he's such a good dad. I showed Leo, and he zoomed in on Marcus's face in the photo. He looked happy and normal, not like someone who would beat a woman half to death for money. But then Leo scrolled to posts from 6 months ago where Marcus was complaining about his ex-wife taking him back to court for unpaid child support. He wrote about how he might lose custody if he couldn't catch up on payments. One post said he owes over $20,000 and his wages are getting garnished. Another post from 2 months ago said he's desperate and needs a miracle. Dad must have seen these posts and knew exactly how to manipulate Marcus into doing what he wanted. I felt sick thinking about how Dad used Marcus's love for his daughter as leverage to get him to hurt Mom. Leo and I sat in his car outside Marcus's apartment building and talked through our options for 3 straight days. I kept saying we should just go to the cops with everything we know, showed them the security footage, tell them about Silas's new car and paid-off mortgage, explain how Dad has a history of paying people for favors. But Leo shook his head every time and reminded me that Dad would hire an expensive lawyer who would tear apart our investigation. Silas would claim the money came from somewhere else, and that his tattoo is common. Marcus would say he was at work when Mom got attacked, and his employer might back him up. Dad would cry in court about how his sons are trying to frame him because they're angry about the divorce that never happened. The prosecutor would look at our surveillance photos and recordings and say we conducted an illegal investigation that violated privacy laws. Everything we worked for over 13 months would get thrown out and those 3 would walk free. I knew Leo was right, but it made me want to punch something. We needed hard evidence that couldn't be explained away or dismissed. We needed Marcus to confess on record, or we needed to catch Dad paying him. I suggested we record Marcus admitting what he did, and Leo's eyes lit up like he does when he figures out an opponent's weakness. We drove to an electronics store and bought a small voice recorder that fits in a pocket. Back at Leo's apartment, we practiced what we'd say to Marcus to get him talking. Leo would show him the security footage, and I'd tell him we know Dad paid him. We'd act like we already have proof and see if Marcus panics and starts explaining. The key was to approach him somewhere public so he couldn't run or fight back, and to stay calm so he didn't realize we were recording. We spent hours rehearsing different scenarios and responses until we had it down. For the next 2 weeks, we kept following Marcus and learning his routine. Every Friday night, he went to the same bar called the Driftwood on the east side of town. It's a dive place with sticky floors and a pool table in the back corner. The lighting is dim and the music is loud enough that conversations blend together. Nobody there pays attention to anyone else's business. It's perfect for what we need to do. On the 3rd Friday, we followed Marcus to the Driftwood and watched through the window as he ordered a beer and sat at the bar. We waited in the car until he was on his 3rd drink and starting to relax. His shoulders dropped, and he was laughing at something the bartender had said. That's when we walked in and slid into the booth directly across from where he was sitting. Marcus glanced over at us, and his expression went from casual to confused. He stared at Leo and then at me like he was trying to figure out where he knows us from. Then recognition hit, and his face went white. He stood up fast, and his bar stool scraped against the floor. I leaned forward and told him to sit back down, that we just wanted to talk about what happened to our mother. My voice was calm but firm, and I could see Marcus calculating whether he should run for the exit or hear us out. He sat back down slowly, and his hands were shaking as he picked up his beer. Leo pulled out his phone and opened the security footage from Mom's attack. He held it up so Marcus could see the screen and zoomed in on the moment when Marcus's mask slipped,
And his face was visible for just a second. Marcus's eyes went wide, and he stammered that he didn't know what we were talking about, that he's never seen that video before. But sweat was forming on his forehead, and his leg was bouncing under the table. Leo zoomed in on Silas's tattoo next, and then back to Marcus's face. I leaned in close and told Marcus we know everything, that Dad already told us he hired Marcus and Silas, that Silas admitted to being there. Marcus's mouth opened like he wanted to deny it, but no words came out. His face crumbled, and he looked down at his beer like he was going to cry. Then he started talking fast, words spilling out in a rush. He said Dad told him Mom stole money during their separation, that she was keeping Dad away from his sons, that she deserved to be taught a lesson about respect. The recorder in my pocket was running and catching every single word. Marcus said he didn't want to hurt Mom that badly, that the plan was just to scare her. But Silas got carried away with the beating and wouldn't stop. He was making excuses and trying to shift blame, but he was still confessing to being there and participating. I asked him why he did it, and Marcus's voice broke. He said Dad promised him $15,000, enough to catch up on child support and keep his ex-wife from taking his daughter away for good. He said he was desperate, and Dad made it sound like Mom was a terrible person who had ruined their family and deserved what happened. My hands clenched into fist under the table, but I forced my voice to stay calm. I asked more questions about the planning, about when they broke in, about what Dad specifically told them to do. Marcus kept answering because he thought we already knew everything and that cooperating might help him somehow. Leo asked when Dad paid him the money, and Marcus said half up front and half after it was done. He pulled out his phone to show us his bank account as proof that he was telling the truth. His hands were shaking so badly he almost dropped the phone, but he managed to pull up his transaction history. I took photos of his screen showing 2 cash deposits of $7,500 each. One was dated 5 days before Mom's attack, and one was dated 3 days after. It was perfect evidence that tied the payment directly to the timeline of what happened. Marcus started crying and saying he was sorry over and over. He said he needed the money so badly that his daughter was going to be taken away, that Dad made Mom sound like she had ruined his life and deserved what happened. He begged us not to go to the cops because he'd lose his job and his kid and everything he'd worked for. I felt absolutely zero sympathy for him because Mom could have died from the beating he gave her. Leo leaned forward and his voice dropped to something cold and final. He told Marcus he had 2 choices: turn himself into the cops within 24 hours and confess everything, or we take the recording and all the evidence straight to the police ourselves. Marcus's face went white and he started shaking his head fast, saying he couldn't go to jail, his daughter needed him, his ex-wife would never let him see her again if he got arrested. He was begging now, asking if there was anything else he could do, any other way to make this right. I stood up and looked down at him, telling him he had until tomorrow night to decide, and if he ran, we'd hunt him down and make sure he never saw his kid again. We walked out of the bar without looking back, leaving Marcus sitting there with his hands covering his face. In the parking lot, Leo and I stood by my car, arguing in harsh whispers. I thought we should go straight to the cops right now with what we had because giving Marcus time was stupid. He was obviously going to run. Leo disagreed and said we needed to give him the chance to do the right thing, that it'd look better in court if he turned himself in voluntarily. I told Leo that Marcus was a coward who beat up our mom for money. He wasn't going to suddenly grow a conscience. We went back and forth for 10 minutes until we compromised. We'd watch Marcus's apartment tonight to make sure he didn't disappear, and if he was still there tomorrow, we'd give him until the deadline. We drove to Marcus's building and parked where we could see his truck and his window. The lights in his apartment stayed on until past 2 a.m., and we took turns keeping watch. Around 3 a.m., the lights finally went off and we both tried to sleep in the car, one of us always keeping an eye on his truck. The next morning at 6 a.m., Marcus's truck was still in the parking lot, and I started to think maybe Leo was right. Maybe Marcus would actually turn himself in. We watched him leave for work at 7:30 a.m. in his delivery uniform like it was a normal day. Leo said we should tail him to make sure he actually went to work and didn't head for the highway instead. We followed his truck to the distribution center and watched him park and walk inside. I told Leo we should go home and get some sleep, come back tonight to see if Marcus kept his word. We headed to Leo's place and crashed for a few hours, but I couldn't really sleep because my mind kept replaying Marcus's confession and wondering if we were making a huge mistake. Around noon, Leo's phone rang and woke us both up. It was a number we didn't know, but Leo answered it anyway, putting it on speaker. The voice on the other end asked if we were looking for Marcus, and my stomach dropped. It was one of his coworkers from the distribution center saying Marcus called in sick this morning and asked him to tell us if we came by. The coworker sounded confused about why Marcus would want him to pass a message to us, but we thanked him and hung up fast. Leo and I looked at each other and we both knew what this meant. Marcus ran.
We jumped in the car and sped back to his apartment building. His truck was gone from the parking spot, and when we went up to his door and knocked, nobody answered. I kicked the door in frustration, and Leo pulled out his phone to call the distribution center back, pretending to be Marcus's friend, asking if anyone knew where he might be. The person on the phone said Marcus just called in sick for 1 day, not like he quit or anything, so he was probably still in town somewhere. We spent the entire day driving around to every place we thought Marcus might go. First, we checked his ex-wife's house, but her car was there and Marcus's truck wasn't, so we didn't knock because we didn't want to scare her. Then we drove to Dad's house and circled the block 3 times, but there was no sign of Marcus's truck. We tried Silas's apartment next and sat outside for an hour watching, but Marcus never showed up. By 6 p.m., we were running out of ideas, and I was getting more and more angry that we let him slip away. Leo suggested checking cheap motels near the highway because that's where someone would hide if they were planning to run but hadn't left yet. We started at the north end of town and worked our way south, checking parking lots at every rundown motel we passed. Finally, at 8 p.m., we spotted Marcus's truck parked outside a place called the Wayfarer Inn, one of those sketchy places that rents rooms by the hour. Leo wanted to go knock on doors until we found which room he was in, confront him again, and force him to come with us to the police. I was done playing games, though, and I pulled out my phone to call Mom. She answered on the second ring, and I could hear the TV in the background. I told her we found the guys who hurt her, that we had evidence and a recording of one of them confessing, and that we were
going to the police tonight to turn everything over. Mom started crying immediately, but it was different from before. It was relief and fear mixed together. She begged us to be careful, to let the legal system handle it from here, to please not do anything that would get us in trouble or hurt. She kept saying she couldn't lose us too, that she needed us safe more than she needed revenge. I promised her we'd do this the right way, that we were going straight to the police station right now, even though part of me still wanted to drag Marcus out of that motel room and make him pay personally for what he did. We drove to the police station and walked up to the front desk. I asked to speak with Detective Miller, who handled Mom's case originally, and the officer at the desk looked surprised but called her. 20 minutes later, Detective Miller came out to the lobby, and she looked older than I remembered, more tired. She recognized us immediately, and her expression was cautious as she led us back to an interview room. The room was small, with a metal table and uncomfortable chairs, and there was a camera in the corner with a red light on. Leo and I sat down and started laying out everything we found over the past 13 months. We showed her the photos we took of Silas, the screenshots of Marcus's bank deposits, the recording of Marcus's confession at the bar. We told her about Dad's secret son, about Silas's new car and paid-off mortgage, about following them and tracking their movements. We explained how we connected Silas's tattoo from the security footage to Dad's friend, how we found Marcus through Dad's confession, how all the pieces fit together into a clear picture of conspiracy. Detective Miller sat with her arms crossed the entire time, and her expression got harder and harder as we talked. When we finally finished, she was quiet for a long moment, and then she told us we'd conducted an illegal investigation. She said the recording might not be allowed in court because of consent laws, that we'd potentially messed up the entire case by confronting suspects and threatening them. She asked if we assaulted anyone, if we made any threats, if we broke any laws during our investigation. My heart was sinking because we thought we were helping Mom get justice, but maybe we just made everything worse. I admitted that we confronted Silas and Dad at Dad's house, that we might have scared them, but we didn't actually hurt anyone. Leo added that we only followed people in public places and took photos that anyone could have taken. Detective Miller sighed and pulled out a notepad, telling us we needed to write detailed statements about every single step of our investigation. She wanted to know every person we followed, every piece of evidence we gathered, every conversation we had, every place we went. She said she needed to know exactly what we did so she could figure out what parts of the case were still good and what parts we ruined. The process took 4 hours and my hand was cramping from writing by the end. We filled out page after page describing our surveillance of Silas, our tracking of Marcus, our confrontation at Dad's house,
our recording at the bar. Every time we thought we were done, Detective Miller asked another question that required 3 more paragraphs. By the time we finished, it was past midnight and I was exhausted and terrified that we were about to be arrested for stalking or harassment or something worse. Detective Miller collected all our statements and told us she needed to talk with the district attorney about how to move forward. She said they'd be in touch and that we should not contact any of the suspects or do any more investigating on our own. We drove home in silence, and I couldn't tell if we'd just saved Mom's case or destroyed it completely. 2 days later, Detective Miller called my phone and asked us to come back to the station. She suggested we bring a lawyer if we had one, and the tone of her voice made it clear this wasn't optional. It was more like a command. Leo and I were terrified because we thought we were about to be arrested for everything we did. We didn't have a lawyer and couldn't afford one, so we just showed up at the station the next morning trying not to panic. Detective Miller met us in the lobby again, but this time there was someone with her, a young guy in a suit who looked maybe 30 years old. She introduced him as Adam Reed from the district attorney's office, and he shook our hands with a firm grip. We followed them back to a conference room that was bigger than the interview room, with a long table and actual comfortable chairs. Adam Reed sat down across from us and didn't waste time with small talk. He told us straight up that we created a huge mess by investigating on our own, that we could have destroyed the case against the people who hurt our mom. But then his expression shifted slightly, and he said that despite our methods being questionable, the evidence we gathered pointed to a clear conspiracy to commit assault. He'd looked at the bank records, the photos, the security footage with Silas's tattoo, and even though the recording might not be allowed in court, everything else built a solid case. He said if we cooperated fully going forward and stopped doing anything on our own, he was willing to work with us to prosecute Dad, Marcus, and Silas for what they did to our mom. Reed pulled out a folder and spread photos across the table, pointing to the bank deposits we documented. He said the financial records were solid evidence because they showed a clear pattern of payments right before and after the attack. The photos of Marcus and Silas together gave context to their relationship, but then he tapped the recording device we'd used at the bar and his expression got serious. He explained that depending on state law, recording someone without their knowledge might not be allowed in court. The defense could argue it was obtained illegally and give it thrown out completely. My stomach dropped because that recording had Marcus admitting everything. Reed must have seen my face because he quickly added that even without the recording, the case was strong enough to move forward. He'd planned to bring Silas in for questioning within the next few hours and offer him a deal. If Silas agreed to testify against Dad and Marcus, he'd get reduced charges or maybe just probation. Leo asked why we'd let Silas off easy, and Reed said it was about building the strongest case possible. With Silas's testimony, they could prove Dad orchestrated the whole thing. Without it, Dad could claim he knew nothing, and Marcus acted alone. Detective Miller nodded and said this was standard procedure in conspiracy cases. You flipped the weakest link to get the bigger fish. I hated it, but understood the logic. That same afternoon, Detective Miller and 2 other officers drove to the motel where we tracked Marcus. We let them wait at the station, and we watched through the window overlooking the parking lot when they brought suspects in. We sat there for 2 hours, drinking bad coffee and barely talking. Finally, a police car pulled up, and I saw Marcus in the back seat. The officers opened the door, and Marcus bolted the second his feet hit pavement. He sprinted toward the street, but Detective Miller had positioned the 3rd officer there. They tackled him hard onto the asphalt and cuffed him while he yelled about police harassment. Watching them walk him past the window in handcuffs should have felt satisfying. We'd spent 13 months tracking this guy. We'd confronted him, recorded him, and now he was finally caught. But instead, I felt empty. This wasn't the justice we originally wanted. We wanted to make him hurt the way he hurt Mom.
We wanted him to feel scared and broken. Instead, he was just getting arrested and processed like any other criminal. Leo must have felt the same because he stared at the floor instead of watching Marcus get brought inside.
The whole thing felt too clean, too official, too far from the raw justice we'd imagined. Marcus's lawyer showed up 3 hours later, some guy in an expensive suit who looked annoyed to be there. Reed told us through the glass that Marcus was invoking his right to remain silent on his lawyer's advice. This was completely normal and expected. Marcus would sit in a holding cell until his arraignment hearing, probably in a day or two. Then they brought Dad in for questioning. We couldn't hear what was happening, but we watched through the one-way glass as Dad sat across from Detective Miller, looking small and scared. His lawyer arrived within 20 minutes and immediately shut down the questioning. Dad didn't say a single word. Then Silas came in separately with his own lawyer. Same result. Everyone lawyered up and refused to talk. Reed said this was actually good for the prosecution because it meant they were scared and defensive. Innocent people usually wanted to explain themselves. Guilty people hid behind lawyers. Still, watching all three of them walk out of questioning without giving statements made me feel like we'd accomplished nothing. We had evidence and recordings and photos, but they were all just going to sit there silently and let their lawyers do the talking. The next week crawled by, slower than any week of my life. Every morning, I woke up expecting news and got nothing. Every afternoon, I checked my phone, hoping Reed would call with updates. Leo and I tried to train at the gym, but our hearts weren't in it. We'd go through the motions of sparring and hitting bags, but the whole time we were thinking about the case. Mom called us every day asking if we'd heard anything. On Wednesday, she went to court with Detective Miller and got a protection order against Dad, Marcus, and Silas. The order said none of them could contact her, come near her house, or be within 500 feet of her. A victim advocate from the hospital, Mara Chen, met with Mom that same day to explain court procedures. She walked Mom through what an arraignment was, what a preliminary hearing meant, what to expect if the case went to trial. Mom called me after that meeting, sounding overwhelmed. She said there were so many steps and so much waiting. Mara told her these cases could take months or even years to fully resolve. I tried to sound encouraging, but honestly, I was just as frustrated as she was. Friday afternoon, my phone finally rang with Reed's number. He said Silas's lawyer had reached out about a cooperation deal. Silas was willing to testify that Dad paid him and Marcus to assault Mom. He'd say Dad planned everything as revenge for the cheating accusations from 5 years ago. Silas would explain how Dad contacted him, how much money was offered, how they planned the break-in to look random. In exchange, Silas wanted his charges reduced from assault to accessory, and he wanted no jail time, just probation and community service. I felt my jaw clench as Reed explained this. Silas had helped beat Mom until her face was unrecognizable, and he wanted to walk free? Reed said the deal was contingent on Silas's testimony being truthful and complete. If he lied or held anything back, the deal was off, and he'd face full charges. He asked what Leo and I thought about accepting the deal. I told him I needed to talk to Leo and call him back. 2 days later, Leo and I sat in Reed's office discussing the deal. I said I hated everything about it. Silas should go to prison for what he did. Reed leaned back in his chair and said he understood our feelings, but we needed to think strategically. Without Silas's testimony, the case against Dad was much weaker. Dad's lawyer would argue that Dad was just a father venting frustrations to his son. He'd say Marcus took it upon himself to act, and Dad had no knowledge of the attack. Marcus would probably claim the same thing, that he misunderstood or acted alone. The bank deposits could be explained as legitimate family support. The security footage showed Marcus and Silas, but not Dad. Silas's testimony was the link that connected everything. He could testify that Dad explicitly hired them, that Dad gave specific instructions, that Dad paid them afterward. With Silas's testimony, the conspiracy case was solid. Without it, the case was shaky. Leo asked what happened if we said no to the deal. Reed said they'd prosecute Silas too, but all 3 defendants would probably get lighter sentences because the evidence was weaker. Or worse, Dad might get acquitted completely. We agreed to the deal, even though it made us sick. Getting Dad convicted mattered more than punishing Silas. Mom was harder to convince when we told her. She cried and said Silas hurt her just as much as Marcus did. Why should he walk free while Marcus went to jail? I explained what Reed said about the testimony being crucial. She asked if we trusted Silas to tell the truth. I said the deal required him to be completely honest or he'd face full charges. After an hour of talking, she finally accepted it. She said she wanted Dad to pay for what he did more than anything. If letting Silas off was the price, she'd agree to it. 2 weeks later, Silas appeared in court and pleaded guilty to accessory to assault. He stood there looking at the floor while the judge explained his sentence: 2 years probation, 300 hours community service, and restitution payments to Mom for her medical bills. He agreed to testify fully and truthfully at Dad's and Marcus's trials. Walking out of that courthouse knowing Silas was free made my hands shake with anger. 2 weeks after the arrests, Dad's arraignment finally happened. Leo and I sat in the courtroom watching Dad stand before the judge in an orange jumpsuit. The judge read the charges out loud: conspiracy to commit assault. Dad's lawyer immediately entered a not guilty plea. Then the lawyer started arguing that Dad was just a father venting frustrations to his son. He said there was no evidence Dad explicitly ordered an attack. The bank deposits were normal family support. Dad never intended anyone to get hurt. It was all Marcus's misunderstanding and Silas's involvement. The prosecution pushed back hard, citing Silas's cooperation agreement and upcoming testimony. The judge listened to both sides, then set bail at $50,000. I thought maybe Dad would have to stay in jail, but his lawyer pulled out a credit card right there in the courtroom and posted bail within an hour. Dad walked out a free man until trial. Watching him leave the courthouse in regular clothes, no handcuffs, no orange jumpsuit, made me want to scream. Marcus's arraignment happened separately the next week. His lawyer entered a not guilty plea and immediately started attacking the evidence. He argued the security footage was too grainy to positively identify Marcus. He said the bank deposits proved nothing because Dad could have been giving his son legitimate financial help. He claimed Marcus was at work when the assault happened and had witnesses to prove it. Reed stood up and methodically destroyed each argument. He had the bank deposits timed exactly with the attack. He had Silas's testimony placing Marcus on the scene. He had the security footage showing Marcus's face when his mask slipped. The judge wasn't buying the defense's arguments. He set bail at $75,000, higher than Dad's, because Marcus had actually committed the physical assault. Marcus couldn't post bail. He stayed in jail waiting for trial.
The preliminary hearings dragged on for 2 months with constant continuances and motions. Every time we thought we were making progress, some lawyer would file a motion to suppress evidence or request more time. Leo and I attended every single court date. We sat in the gallery behind Mom, showing Dad and Marcus we weren't backing down. We wanted them to see us every time they walked into that courtroom. The stress started wearing on all of us. Mom stopped sleeping well and started taking medication for anxiety. Leo got short-tempered at the gym and snapped at people during training. I started having trouble sleeping because every time I closed my eyes, I replayed the confrontation at Dad's house. I kept thinking about how close we came to doing something we couldn't take back, how we almost became criminals ourselves trying to get justice. The legal system moved so slowly it felt like torture, but at least it was moving forward. At least Dad and Marcus would eventually face real consequences. That had to be enough. One afternoon after a hearing, Detective Miller pulled Leo and me into a side hallway away from the crowd. Her face looked serious in a way that made my stomach tighten. She told us Dad's lawyer was building a case that we had harassed and threatened their clients. She said they had statements from Dad and Silas about the confrontation at Dad's house, and they were claiming we forced confessions through violence. Detective Miller looked us straight in the eyes and said we needed to stay away from Dad, Marcus, and Silas completely, or we could face charges ourselves. The warning felt so unfair because we were the victim's family, but she made it clear she was trying to protect us. We agreed to keep our distance, even though every part of me wanted to show up at every court date and stare them down. Leo nodded and promised we'd stay away, and Detective Miller seemed relieved, but still worried. She walked away and left us standing in that hallway, feeling like somehow we were the ones in trouble. The next week, my phone rang while I was at work, and Coach Ruiz's name popped up on the screen. My hands got sweaty because Coach Ruiz never called unless something was wrong at the gym. I answered, and he asked me to come in for a conversation about the case. His voice sounded different,
not angry, but disappointed, and that made it worse. I drove to the gym after my shift ended and found Coach Ruiz in his office with the door closed. He gestured for me to sit down and asked directly if Leo and I had done anything illegal during our investigation. I could have lied, but Coach Ruiz had been our coach for 12 years, and he deserved the truth. I told him about following Silas and Marcus, about the confrontation at Dad's house, about everything we did before going to the police. Coach Ruiz listened without interrupting, and when I finished, he just shook his head slowly. He looked disappointed, but not surprised, like he'd suspected we'd crossed lines, but hoped we hadn't. Coach Ruiz leaned back in his chair and said he'd support us as character witnesses if the court needed that, but the gym had to distance itself publicly from any vigilante activity. He reminded me that MMA training was supposed to teach discipline and control, not encourage people to take justice into their own hands. His words stung because he was right. We'd lost control. He said the gym's reputation depended on students using their skills responsibly, and he couldn't have people thinking he trained vigilantes. I understood what he meant, but it still hurt to hear him say the gym had to distance itself from us. Coach Ruiz told me I could keep training there, but I needed to be an example of doing things the right way from now on. I left his office feeling smaller than I had in years, like I had let down someone who mattered. 4 months crawled by with more court dates and legal paperwork than I could keep track of. Then Reed called and said Marcus's lawyer had approached him about a plea deal. Marcus was willing to plead guilty to aggravated assault in exchange for a recommended sentence of 5 years with possibility of parole. Reed said he wanted to meet with us and Mom to get our input before responding to the offer. We drove to his office downtown and sat in a conference room with harsh fluorescent lights. Reed laid out the details of the plea deal and explained that if Marcus went to trial, he might get more time, but there was also a chance a jury could give him less. He said plea deals gave certainty, but often felt unsatisfying because the sentences seemed too light. Mom sat quietly while Reed talked, and I could see her hands shaking slightly in her lap. When Reed finished explaining everything, Mom surprised both Leo and me by saying she wanted to accept the plea deal. She said she was tired from the court process and didn't want to go through a trial where she had to testify and relive the attack in front of strangers. Her voice cracked when she talked about having to describe the beating in detail while Marcus sat there watching. Leo and I were torn because 5 years felt too light for what Marcus did to her. I thought about Mom's face in the hospital, purple and swollen, and 5 years seemed like nothing. But Mom kept saying she just wanted it over, that she needed to move on with her life and stop reliving that night. Leo looked at me and I could see the same struggle in his eyes, wanting justice, but also wanting Mom to have peace. We told Reed we'd defer to Mom's wishes, since she was the victim and had to live with the outcome. Dad's trial got scheduled for 2 months after Marcus's plea deal, because Dad was refusing everything and insisting on his innocence. Reed told us Dad's strategy was to claim that Marcus and Silas acted independently, and that any money he gave Marcus was for legitimate family support. Dad's lawyer was going to argue that Dad had no idea what Marcus and Silas were planning, and was shocked when he found out. Reed seemed confident the jury would see through the lies because the bank deposits were timed exactly with the attack, and Silas was going to testify that Dad orchestrated everything. The trial date appeared on our calendars like a countdown to something we'd been waiting for since the night we found Mom in the hospital. The week before Dad's trial was supposed to start, Reed called with news that Dad's lawyer had contacted him with a last-minute plea offer. Dad would plead guilty to conspiracy to commit assault for 3 years in prison. I felt anger rise up in my chest because 3 years was even less than Marcus was getting, and Dad was the one who planned everything. Reed said he'd already pushed back and demanded 5 years to match Marcus's sentence. He said the negotiation went back and forth for hours, and they finally settled on 4 years. Reed asked if we wanted him to reject the offer and go to trial anyway, but he warned that trials were unpredictable, and Dad might end up with less time if a jury felt sympathetic. Mom accepted Dad's plea deal with visible relief spreading across her face. She told us she just wanted this over and that she needed to move on with her life and stop reliving that night.
Over so she could move on with her life and stop thinking about court dates and lawyers. Leo and I sat on her couch struggling with the outcome because 4 years felt so inadequate for planning an attack that could have killed her. I kept thinking about how Dad paid his own son to beat his ex-wife, how he orchestrated everything out of spite and wounded pride. 4 years seemed like nothing compared to the lifetime of trauma Mom would carry. But Mom kept saying she was done, that she couldn't handle more court appearances and more lawyers arguing about her life. We respected her decision, even though it felt wrong in our guts. Silas's sentencing hearing happened first since he cooperated with the prosecution. Leo and I sat in the courtroom with Mom and watched Silas stand before the judge in a suit that looked too big for him. The judge gave him 2 years probation, community service, and ordered him to pay restitution to Mom for her medical bills. Silas walked out of the courthouse a free man, and I watched him get into his car and drive away like nothing had happened. My hands clenched into fists, and I felt that familiar rage building in my chest. Reed met us outside and reminded us that Silas's testimony was crucial for getting convictions against Dad and Marcus. He said, "Sometimes the justice system requires uncomfortable compromises to catch the bigger fish." I understood the logic, but it didn't make watching Silas walk free any easier. Marcus's sentencing 2 weeks later was emotional in a way I didn't expect. His daughter was in the courtroom crying, maybe 10 years old, and I could see Marcus trying not to look at her. The judge lectured Marcus about betraying his own family and using financial problems as an excuse for violence. He said Marcus had choices, and he chose to brutally assault an innocent woman for money. The judge gave him 5 years in state prison with parole eligibility after 3, and ordered him to pay restitution jointly with Silas. Marcus's daughter sobbed louder when the bailiff led him away in handcuffs. Part of me felt satisfied seeing him taken to prison, but another part felt sick watching his kid lose her father. Mom reached over and squeezed my hand, and I knew she was thinking about how this whole mess had destroyed multiple families, not just ours. 2 weeks later, we sat in the courtroom for Dad's sentencing, and my stomach was twisted in knots. Dad stood before the judge in an orange jumpsuit, looking smaller than I remembered, his hands cuffed in front of him. The judge asked if he wanted to make a statement, and Dad nodded. He started talking about how he never meant for Mom to get hurt that badly, that he just wanted to scare her into admitting the truth about the cheating that never happened. He said he was sorry for everything and that he'd made terrible choices driven by anger and pain. His voice cracked when he talked about losing his sons and his family. The judge's face stayed hard the whole time Dad spoke. When Dad finished, the judge leaned forward and said Dad's actions were calculated and cruel, that he'd planned and paid for a brutal assault on an innocent woman. The judge said Dad showed no real remorse until he got caught, and that his apology meant nothing compared to the trauma he caused. 4 years in state prison with no possibility of early parole. The bailiff led Dad away in handcuffs, and he looked back at us one time with tears on his face. Mom started shaking next to me, and then the tears came. We walked out to the hallway, and she just collapsed against the wall sobbing. Leo and I held her while she cried and kept saying she never thought it would end like this, that she never wanted Dad to go to prison, that everything was so messed up. We got her to the car and drove her home. The whole ride she stared out the window, not saying anything. At her house, we ordered Chinese food and put on her favorite romantic comedy. She barely touched the food, but she laughed a few times at the movie. We stayed until midnight, making sure she was okay and didn't want to be alone. A week later, my phone rang while I was at Leo's apartment. Detective Miller's name showed on the screen, and my heart started racing. She said the DA's office reviewed everything about our investigation and decided not to file charges against us. They considered the case closed with all 3 attackers convicted and didn't want to punish the victim's family for seeking justice on their own. The relief hit me so hard I had to sit down. I called Leo immediately, and he actually yelled with happiness. We'd been worried for months that we'd end up in legal trouble for confronting Silas and Dad, for following people, and for recording Marcus without permission. 2 days after that call, an envelope arrived with the DA's office return address. Inside was a letter from Reed thanking us for our cooperation throughout the prosecution. He wrote that our methods were unorthodox and he couldn't officially approve a vigilante investigation, but our evidence was crucial to securing all 3 convictions. He included pamphlets about victim services and counseling resources for trauma survivors. He also wrote that he hoped our family could find peace and healing now that justice had been served. The letter felt like closure, even though it was just a piece of paper. Leo and I drove to the gym to talk with Coach Ruiz about coming back to training. We hadn't been there regularly in 6 months because of court dates and meetings with lawyers. Coach Ruiz met us in his office and looked us over like he was checking for injuries. He said we looked terrible, out of shape, and exhausted. I admitted we'd let training slide while dealing with everything. Coach Ruiz said he understood, but that if we wanted to come back, we had to attend anger management classes first. He said the gym couldn't have members who might lose control and hurt someone because they hadn't dealt with their anger issues. Leo started to argue, but I stopped him because Coach Ruiz was right. We'd almost destroyed our own lives chasing revenge, and we needed help processing that. The first anger management class was weird because everyone else there was way older than us. The counselor was a woman in her 50s named Dr. Vance, who asked us to introduce ourselves and explain why we were there. Leo and I took turns telling the story about Mom's attack and our investigation. The other people in the group were shocked, and a few seemed impressed that we'd tracked down the attackers ourselves. Dr. Vance didn't look impressed at all. She spent the next hour talking about how rage can feel righteous and justified, but it destroys the person feeling it just as much as the target. She said revenge and justice aren't the same thing, even though they can look similar from the outside. Over the next few weeks, she got us talking about how the anger drove every decision we made for 13 months. She made us see how we'd almost thrown away our futures and hurt innocent people in our quest to
Dad and his friends pay. The sessions were uncomfortable, but slowly something started shifting in how I thought about everything that happened. Mom started seeing a therapist who worked with crime victims and trauma survivors. She told us the nightmares were happening less often, but she still woke up scared sometimes. She was having trouble being in her house alone, especially at night. Leo and I spent a weekend installing new deadbolts on every door and adding cameras to cover blind spots the old system missed. We put motion sensor lights all around the outside of the house so nothing could move near her windows without triggering bright lights. Mom watched us work and said she felt safer already, just knowing we were making her house more secure. 3 months after all the sentencings, Mom called and asked us to come over. She had real estate listings spread across her kitchen table. She said she'd been thinking about moving to a different neighborhood because the current house held too many bad memories. Every room reminded her of that night, and she wanted a fresh start somewhere new. Leo and I spent the next 2 weeks driving her around to look at houses. She wanted something smaller, easier to maintain, with good security features already in place. We found a place near our gym that had reinforced doors and a good alarm system. The neighborhood was quiet, with lots of families and people walking dogs. Mom's face lit up when we walked through it, and she said it felt right. The moving process took 3 weeks, and all of us worked together packing up the old house. Leo and I made sure Mom's new place had locks on every window and reinforced frames on the doors. We installed cameras covering every angle and set up the alarm system to call our phones if it triggered. Mom joked that her house was more secure than a bank vault now, but we could see the relief in her eyes when she locked the doors at night. Mara Chen, the victim advocate from the hospital, called Mom regularly to check on her recovery. She connected Mom with a support group for assault survivors that met twice a month at a community center. She was nervous about going at first and said she didn't want to sit around talking about being a victim. Mara convinced her to try one meeting. After that first meeting, Mom came home and said it actually helped to talk with people who understood what she'd been through. She started going regularly and made friends with other women who were working through their own trauma. She told us the group made her feel less alone and gave her hope that she could heal and move forward with her life. 6 months after the trials ended, Leo and I walked into our last anger management session. Dr. Vance sat across from us with 2 manila folders. She opened them and pulled out letters she'd written for our records, stating we'd successfully completed the program and developed healthy ways to handle our anger.
We signed some paperwork, and she handed us the letters in sealed envelopes. Coach Ruiz was waiting for us at the gym when we showed up that afternoon. We gave him the letters, and he read them carefully, nodding as he went through each page. He walked to his office and came back with 2 cheap frames from the dollar store. He put our letters in the frames and hung them on the wall behind his desk, right next to his black belt certificates and competition photos. He tapped the frames and said they'd remind everyone that being strong meant controlling your emotions, not just your fists. We started training seriously again the next week. The discipline felt good after months of court dates and stress. Our sparring sessions were different now because we were more aware of the damage we could do. Every time I threw a punch at Leo, I thought about the responsibility that came with 13 years of training. He moved the same way, more controlled and precise, instead of just trying to land hits. Coach Ruiz pushed us harder than he ever had before, making us do extra rounds and more technical drills. He was channeling our intensity into technique rather than letting us fight angry. One Saturday morning, Mom showed up at the gym. We were in the middle of a sparring round when I saw her walk in and sit on the bench near the door. It was the first time she'd seen us spar since before the attack happened. Leo and I worked through our combinations, blocking and countering with the precision Coach Ruiz had been drilling into us for weeks. When the round ended, I looked over and saw Mom wiping tears from her face. She walked over and hugged both of us, not caring that we were sweaty and gross. She told us she was proud of how we'd handled everything, even though the path had been messy and painful. That meant more to us than any championship belt ever could. A year after Dad got sentenced, Mom called me at work. She sounded stressed and said she needed to talk with Leo and me about something. We met at her house that evening, and she showed us a letter that had arrived in the mail. The return address was the state prison where Dad was locked up. The envelope was still sealed, and Mom said she didn't know if she should open it or throw it away. Leo picked up the envelope and looked at it for a long time. I told Mom it was completely her choice, that she didn't owe Dad anything, including reading whatever he wanted to say. She took the envelope from Leo, walked to the kitchen, and dropped it in the trash without opening it. She came back and said she was done with that chapter of her life. A few weeks later, Mom got a call from the victim advocate. The advocate explained that Marcus's ex-wife wanted to apologize for what Marcus had done. She had no idea Marcus was planning to attack anyone, and she was horrified when she found out. The advocate asked if Mom would be willing to accept the letter. Mom agreed, and the letter arrived a few days later. Marcus's ex-wife wrote that she was sorry for the pain Marcus caused, and that she hoped Mom could heal. She said she held no anger toward Mom and wanted her to know that Marcus's daughter didn't know anything about the attack. Mom sat at her kitchen table and wrote a response letter. She told Marcus's ex-wife that she appreciated the apology and that she held no bad feelings toward her or Marcus's daughter. She mailed it the next day and said it felt good to let go of some of the anger. Leo got a call from the director of a youth MMA program across town. They needed a new coach, and Coach Ruiz had recommended him. Leo went to check out the program and came back excited about the opportunity. He accepted the position and started coaching kids twice a week. I went to watch one of his sessions, and he was amazing with them. He taught them proper stance and basic combinations, but he also talked about respect and discipline. He told them that learning to fight meant learning when not to fight. Watching him work with those kids showed me how much we'd both grown from everything that happened. Around the same time, I started volunteering with a victim advocacy organization downtown. They helped families navigate the criminal justice system when someone they loved got hurt. My experience investigating Mom's case and going through the trials gave me knowledge that could help other families. I met with people who were confused about court procedures or scared about testifying. I explained what they could expect and connected them with resources. It felt good to turn our painful journey into something useful for others. On the anniversary of Mom's attack, the 3 of us had dinner at her new house. Mom cooked her famous lasagna,
and we sat around her kitchen table talking about how far we'd come in a year. Mom said she was finally sleeping through the night without nightmares. Leo talked about how coaching the kids gave him purpose beyond just training. I shared stories about the families I'd helped through the victim advocacy program. We didn't get perfect justice, because Dad would be out in 4 years and Marcus in 3. But we got accountability and safety, and the chance to heal together as a family. Life wasn't back to normal, because normal didn't exist anymore after what happened. We'd build something different, though, something better. A family that fought through darkness and made the choice to move forward with honesty and strength.